Section 3. The Middle and New Kingdoms. At the end of the Old Kingdom, the wealth and power of the pharaohs declined. Building and maintaining pyramids cost a lot of money. Pharaohs could not collect enough taxes to keep up with their expenses. At the same time, ambitious nobles used their government position to take power from pharaohs. In time, nobles gained enough power to challenge the pharaohs. By 2200 BC, the Old Kingdom had fallen. For the next 160 years, local nobles ruled much of Egypt. The kingdom had no central ruler. So 3000 BC, so 2700 BC to 2200 BC is the Old Kingdom. About 2050 to 1750 BC, the Middle Kingdom, and 1550 to 1050 years BC is the New Kingdom. Finally, around 2050 BCE, a powerful pharaoh defeated his rivals, and once again all of Egypt was united. His rule began the Middle Kingdom, a period of order and stability which lasted to about 1750 BC. Towards the end of the Middle Kingdom, however, Egypt began to fall into disorder once more. Around 1750 BC, a group of from Southwest Asia called the Hyksos invaded. They used horses, chariots, and advanced weapons to conquer Lower Egypt. Hyksos ruled the region as pharaohs for 200 years. The Egyptians eventually fought back, however. In the mid-1500s BC, Ahmose of Thebes declared himself king and drove the Hyksos out of Egypt. Ahmose has ruled all of Egypt. Ahmose's rule to rise to power marked the beginning of Egypt's 18th dynasty. More importantly, it was the beginning of the New Kingdom, a period in which Egypt reached the height of its power and glory. During the New Kingdom, which lasted from about 1550 BC to 1050 BC, conquests and trade brought wealth to the pharaohs. After battling the Hyksos, Egypt's leaders feared future invasions. To prevent such invasions from occurring, they decided to take control of all possible invasion routes into the kingdom. In the process, these leaders turned Egypt into an empire. As Egypt's first target was the homeland of the Hyksos. After taking over that area, the army continued north and conquered Syria. As you can see from the map, Egypt took over the entire eastern shore of the Mediterranean and the kingdom of Kush. Where's the map? There's the map. Kingdom of Kush and Nubia, south of Egypt. I'm sorry. By 1400 BC, Egypt was the leading military power in the region. Its empire extended from the Euphrates to southern Nubia. Military conquests made Egypt rich. The kingdoms that conquered regularly sent treasures to the Egyptian conquerors. For example, the kingdom of Kush and Nubia, south of Egypt, sent annual payments of gold, leopard skins, and precious stones to the pharaohs. In addition, Assyrian, Babylonian, and Hittite kings sent expensive gifts to Egypt in an effort to maintain good relations. Growth and effects of trade. Conquest also brought Egyptian traders into contact with more distant lands. Egypt's trade expanded along with its empire. Profitable trade routes or paths followed by traders developed. Many of the lands that Egypt took over also had valuable resources for trade. The Sinai Peninsula, for example, had large supplies of turquoise and copper. And here you can see the map. Expand it so you can get in some greater detail. So this is Egypt, right? This is the area called Assyria that is mentioned. Here's Kush in the south, and the Hittites came from this area. Sorry, the Hyksos came from this area, invaded, right? Egypt then took over. This is the Sinai Peninsula that was mentioned. This is Syria and Kush. Nubia is down below. Many of the lands that Egypt took over also had valuable resources for trade. The Sinai Peninsula, for example, right here, had large supplies of turquoise and copper. One ruler who worked to increase Egyptian trade was Queen Hatshepsut. There she is, Hatshepsut. Hatshepsut was married to the pharaoh Thutmose II, her half-brother. He died young, leaving his throne to Thutmose III, his son, by another woman. Because Thutmose III was still very young, Hatshepsut took over power. Many people did not think women should rule, but Hatshepsut dressed as a man and called herself king. After she died, her stepson took back power and vandalized all the monuments that she had built. Queen Hatshepsut, she sent Egyptian traders south to trade with the kingdom of Punt on the Red Sea, and north to trade with the people in Asia Minor and Greece. Hatshepsut and later pharaohs used the money they gained from trade to support the arts and architecture. Pardon. Hatshepsut especially is remembered for the many impressive monuments and temples built during her reign. The best known of these structures was a magnificent temple built for her near the city of Thebes. There's Thebes right there. Despite its great success, Egypt's military might did not go unchallenged. In the 1200s BC, the pharaoh Ramses II, or Ramses the Great, fought the Hittites, a group from Asia Minor. The two powers fought fiercely for years, but neither could defeat the other. Egypt faced threats in other parts of its empire as well. To the west, the people known as the Tehenu invaded the Nile Delta. Ramses fought them off and built a series of forts to strengthen the western frontier. This proved to be a wise decision because the Tehenu invaded again a century later. Faced with Egypt's strengthened defenses, the Tehenu were defeated once again. Soon after Ramses the Great died, invaders called the Sea Peoples sailed into Southwest Asia. Little is known about these people. Historians are not even sure who they were. All we know is that they were strong warriors who had crushed the Hittites and destroyed cities in Southwest Asia. Only after 50 years of fighting were the Egyptians able to turn them back. Egypt survived, but its empire in Asia was gone. Shortly after the invasions of the Hittites and the Sea Peoples, the new kingdom fell to an end. Egypt fell into a period of violence and disorder. Egypt would never regain its power. Although Egyptian dynasties rose and fell, daily life for Egyptians did not change very much. But as the population grew, society became even more complex. A complex society requires people to take on different jobs. In Egypt, these jobs are usually passed on within families. At a young age, boys started to learn the future jobs from their fathers. Other than priests and government officials, no one in Egypt was more honored than scribes. As members of the middle class, scribes worked for the government and the temples. They kept records and accounts for the state. Scribes also wrote and copied religious and literary texts, including stories and poems. Because they were so respected, scribes did not have to pay taxes, and many became very wealthy. Another group in society was made up of artisans whose job required advanced skills. Among the artisans who worked in Egypt were sculptors, builders, carpenters, jewelers, metal workers, and leather workers. Most of Egypt's artisans worked for the government or for temples. They made statues, furniture, jewelry, pottery, shoes, and other items. Most artisans were paid fairly well for their work. Architects and artists were also admired in Egypt. Architects designed the temples and royal tombs for which Egypt is famous. Talented architects could rise to become the high government officials. Artists, often employed by the state or the temples, produced many different works. Artists often worked in deep burial chambers or of the pharaoh's tombs, painting detailed pictures. Right? So you have daily life in Egypt. Most Egyptians spent their days in the fields, plowing and harvesting their crops. An ancient model there. Queen Nefertiti, shown here. And other Egyptian queens wore makeup, jewelry, and perfume. Merchants and traders. Although trade was important to Egypt, only a small group of Egyptians became merchants and traders. Some traveled long distances to buy and sell goods. Merchants were usually accompanied by soldiers and scribes and laborers on their travels. After the wars of the Middle Kingdom, Egypt created a professional army. The militaries offered people a chance to rise in social status. Soldiers received land as payment, and could also keep any treasure they captured in war. Those who excelled could be promoted to officer positions. Farmers and other peasants. As in the Old Kingdom society, Egyptian farmers and other peasants were toward the bottom of Egypt's social scale. These hardworking people made up the vast majority of Egypt's population. Farmers grew crops to support their families. Farmers depended on the Nile's regular floods to grow their crops. They used wooden hoes or plows pulled by cows to prepare the land before the flood. After the flood waters had drained away, farmers planted seeds. They grew crops such as wheat and barley. At the end of the growing season, farmers worked together to gather the harvest. Farmers had to give crops to the pharaohs as taxes. These taxes were intended to pay the pharaoh for using the land. Under Egyptian law, the pharaoh controlled all land in the kingdom. And here we have a model, right, a little statuette of servants preparing food. And so this jar probably held perfume, a valuable trade item. All peasants, including farmers, were also subject to special duty. Under Egyptian law, the pharaoh could demand at any time that people work on projects such as building pyramids, mining gold, or fighting in the army. The government paid the workers in grain. Slaves. The few slaves in Egyptian society were considered lower than farmers. Many slaves were convicted criminals or prisoners captured in war. They worked on farms, on building projects, in workshops, and in private households. Unlike most slaves in history, however, slaves in Egypt had some legal rights. Also, in some cases, they could earn their freedom. Family life in Egypt. Family life was important in Egyptian society. Most Egyptian families lived in their own homes. Sometimes unmarried female relatives lived with them, but men were expected to marry young so that they could start having children. Most Egyptian women were devoted to their homes and their families. Some, however, had jobs outside the home. A few served as priestesses, and some worked as royal officials, administrators, and artisans. Unlike most ancient women, Egyptian women had a number of legal rights. They could own property, make contracts, and divorce their husbands. They could even keep their property after a divorce. Children's lives were not as structured as adults' lives were. They played with toys such as dolls, tops, and clay animals, figurines. Children also played ball games and hunted. Most children, boys and girls, received some education. At school, they learned morals, writing, math, and sports. At age 14, most boys left school to enter their father's profession. At that time, they took their place in Egypt's social structure.